The silence in the house on Hemlock Lane was not merely an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was a thick, velvety quiet that seemed to absorb the scuff of our shoes on the dusty hardwood and the nervous cadence of our own breathing. My wife, Sarah, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, clutched my arm, her fingers tight around my bicep. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" she whispered, as if afraid the house itself might hear us and take offense. I forced a grin, the kind I used to reassure nervous clients back in my old architectural firm. "It's a steal, Sarah, a literal steal. The market for stigmatized properties is niche, but the profit margin, we can triple our investment. Maybe more." The real estate agent, a young man named Brandon who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, jangled the keys. The previous owners, well, they left in a hurry, about 6 months ago. Estate sale. No family wanted to deal with it. He didn't elaborate and we didn't ask. We'd read the sparse, cryptic listing. Significant price reduction. Property sold as is. Unique history. Unique history was realtor code for something bad happened here, but for us, it was code for opportunity. We were flippers, or at least we were trying to be. The dream of a self-made empire, built from the skeletons of forgotten houses, had driven us from our cramped apartment into this cavernous, late Victorian monstrosity. Brandon pushed the heavy oak door open, and the smell hit us, a cocktail of dust, old wood, and the faint Swedish scent of decay, like forgotten flowers in a vase. The foyer was vast, with a staircase sweeping up into shadows. A crystal chandelier, draped in cobwebs, hung like a sleeping beast from the ceiling. "We'll take it from here, Brandon," I said, my voice echoing unnaturally. "We like to get a feel for a place alone." He looked relieved. "Great. I'll be in the car if you need me, just lock up when you're done." He practically fled, the door clicking shut behind him with a sound of finality. And just like that, we were alone. Sarah and Jake Wilson, 28 years old, armed with a tape measure, a camera, and a dream, standing in the gut of a silent waiting house. "Okay," Sarah said, releasing my arm and putting her hands on her hips, a gesture of forced bravado. "Let's see what we're working with." The ground floor was a maze of high-ceilinged rooms, a parlor with faded floral wallpaper peeling at the seams, a dining room dominated by a table large enough to seat 12, a library with empty, gaping shelves. Everything was coated in a fine gray powder. Our footsteps were the only punctuation in the narrative of the house's stillness. It was in the kitchen, a surprisingly large room with outdated avocado green appliances, that we found the first oddity. On the massive, scarred wooden counter, in the exact center, sat a single, clean white mug. There was no dust on it. It looked as if it had just been washed and placed there. "Weird," Sarah murmured, picking it up. Brandon said the place was cleared out. "Maybe the cleaners missed one," I said, though the logic felt flimsy. How could you miss a single pristine mug in a sea of grime? We dismissed it and continued our exploration. The basement was a no-go. The door was locked with a heavy, rusted padlock for which Brandon had not provided a key. Probably just the furnace and a bunch of junk, I reasoned, though the solidity of the lock felt deliberate. The upstairs was more of the same. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms with clawfoot tubs, and a long, dark hallway. In the master bedroom, we found the second anomaly. All the furniture was gone, save for a large, ornate vanity mirror leaning against the far wall. Its frame was intricately carved with what looked like vines and strange, twisting symbols, and it was covered by a white sheet, tied at the top with a coarse piece of twine. Why cover a mirror and leave it? Sarah wondered aloud. Superstition? I offered. Some people think covered mirrors in an empty house keep spirits from getting trapped. She shot me a look. Don't say spirits, Jake. It's creepy. I laughed, but it was a hollow sound. The air in the room felt colder, denser. I reached out and tugged at the knot on the sheet. It was tight, stubborn. Leave it, Sarah said, a sudden urgency in her voice. Let's just measure the windows and go. We can come back tomorrow with the crew. I agreed. The atmosphere was getting to me too. We finished our initial survey, the tape measure zipping and clicking in the quiet, our numbers scribbled on a notepad feeling trivial and absurd. As we headed back downstairs, I glanced over my shoulder. The sheeted mirror in the dark room looked like a silent, hooded sentinel. We bought the house. The paperwork was fast, the transfer seamless. A month later, we moved in with a small crew, a general contractor named Dave, and 2 carpenters, Luis and Javier. The plan was to live on site, camping out in the least damaged room while we oversaw the initial demolition. The first day of work was a cacophony of noise that shattered the house's profound silence. The shriek of crowbars pulling up baseboards, the thud of sledgehammers on lath and plaster, the roar of the industrial dumpster being filled. It was music to my ears. Progress. We were imposing our will on the decay. Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, focused on the kitchen, directing Javier on which cabinets to rip out. I was in the library, helping Dave tear down the old wallpaper. It was under the 3rd layer of paper, a hideous burgundy pattern that we found the writing. It wasn't graffiti. It was neat, cursive script, written in what looked like charcoal or pencil directly onto the plaster. It covered a whole section of the wall. The quiet is not empty. It listens. It learns the shape of you. Dave, a burly man in his 50s, whistled. Creepy. Kids, probably. Probably, I echoed, but a chill traced my spine. The handwriting was too steady, too deliberate. We painted over it without another word, but the phrase stuck with me. It learns the shape of you. That night, after the crew had left, the silence returned, but it was different now. It felt bruised, agitated by the day's violence. Sarah and I sat on sleeping bags in our makeshift bedroom, eating takeout pizza. Did you feel that today? She asked quietly, picking at her crust. When we were working? Feel what? I don't know, like we were being watched. I was in the pantry, and I could have sworn I heard someone walking in the hallway, but when I looked, no one was there. Dave and Luis were outside. Old houses settle, Sarah. They make noises. It's all the wood expanding and contracting. I know that, she said, a little sharply. This wasn't a settling noise. It was a footstep. We let it drop, but the unease had been planted. Later, as we tried to sleep, the house seemed to come alive with subtle sounds. A faint creak from the attic. A skittering that could have been mice, but sounded heavier. I told myself it was the wind, the new stresses we'd put on the structure. Anything but what my primal brain was screaming it was. The next morning, the clean mug was back on the kitchen counter. We had thrown it in the dumpster the day before. I had watched it shatter against a chunk of broken drywall. Yet there it was, whole, white and gleaming, sitting in the exact same spot. Sarah stared at it, her face pale. Jake. It's a prank, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. It has to be. Maybe Dave or one of the guys found a box of them and thinks this is funny. I confronted Dave later that morning. He looked genuinely baffled. A mug? Why would I mess with you like that, Jake? We're on a tight schedule as it is. Luis and Javier denied it too, their expressions earnest. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I didn't believe them. The incidents escalated, but in ways that were frustratingly subtle, deniable. Tools would go missing and reappear in absurd places, a hammer in the bathtub, a tape measure balanced on the newel post at the top of the stairs. We'd hear music, a faint, tinny melody like an old music box, but could never locate its source. It always seemed to be just in the next room, around the next corner. Sarah started having trouble sleeping. She claimed that at night she could hear whispering. Not words, just a soft, sibilant rush of sound, like leaves skittering across pavement. It's in the walls, she said one morning, dark circles under her eyes. It's coming from inside the walls. I was running out of rational explanations. The stress was fraying our nerves and our relationship. We started snapping at each other over nothing. A misplaced screwdriver, a disagreement over paint color. One afternoon, I was working alone, installing new electrical outlets in the hallway. I had my head inside a hole I'd cut in the wall, fishing for wires when I felt it. A breath, a distinct cool puff of air against the back of my neck. It carried a scent, that same sweet, cloying odor of decay from our first visit. I jerked my head out of the wall and spun around. The hallway was empty, but the door to the master bedroom, which I had closed, was now standing wide open. From my vantage point, I could see the sheeted mirror leaning against the far wall, and the sheet was no longer tied at the top. It had been pulled down, crumpled in a heap on the floor. The mirror was uncovered. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked slowly to the doorway. The mirror was old, the silvering behind the glass mottled and dark in places. My reflection wavered, a pale, wide-eyed man standing in a dusty room. I took a step closer. The reflection was wrong. It was me, but my expression was different. It was a sly, knowing smirk, a look I had never worn in my life. And behind my shimmering doppelganger, the room in the reflection wasn't empty. I could see the faint outline of furniture, a bed, a dresser, things that weren't there. I blinked, and the illusion Vi,